Homosexuality is wrong.
Bigotry, woo!
So this girl is stating that a specific sexual behavior is immoral, not that a whole class of people is immoral based upon some innate characteristic. This is why I can objectively say that the word bigot was being misapplied here. Because finding a certain behavior morally objectionable is not bigotry. I would venture to guess that everyone watching this video can think of some behavior that they find to be morally objectionable. And that's okay. That does not make you a bigot. For example, I'm assuming most of us would agree that murder and rape are wrong. But what about sexual morality? Can you think of any sexual behavior that is wrong in and of itself? Now, I'm guessing the majority of the viewers of this video are atheists, who do not believe in an objective standard of morality. But even yet, I'd guess many of you, perhaps not all, but many of you would agree that pedophilia and bestiality are morally wrong as sexual behaviors. You may say that's entirely different though, because that's not sex between consenting adults. Okay, true enough. But how many of you also think that polygamy or incest between adult family members is also morally wrong? If you do and were to be truly consistent, you would have to label yourself a bigot based on the way that word is being used against this girl. Now, let's get to the core of this. Mr. Weber's insinuation that being against homosexuality is comparable to being bigoted toward people of another race.
You know, why don't you just fucking put on a cap? And start fucking hating black people too.
Now, I've already shown that Christians are talking about behavior, and not some innate characteristic of an individual. But let's also talk about the issue of sexual orientation. I think there are three questions that we need to answer here. Number one, is there a one-to-one correlation between sexual orientation and sexual behavior? Number two, is sexual orientation an immutable characteristic such as race? And three, does having a predisposition toward a certain sexual behavior automatically justify that behavior? It's going to be important for us to think about these questions rationally and logically in order to come to the correct answers. Alright, first, is there a one-to-one correlation between sexual orientation and behavior? Or more precisely, does orientation determine behavior? The reason it's important to figure this out is because if there's not a one-to-one correlation, then condemning the behavior is not necessarily condemning those with the orientation. That's important. Let me give two examples to show that there indeed is not a determinative relationship here. First, I've already pointed out that there are people with a same-sex orientation who choose not to engage in homosexuality, but rather to remain celibate. Also, it's a known fact that people without a same-sex orientation have been known to commit homosexual acts. For example, homosexual activity is widely reported in prison populations, not because so many of the inmates have a same-sex orientation, but rather because they are sexual deviants who are so controlled by their lust that they are looking for sex anywhere they can find it. So, while there is a strong association between orientation and behavior, it is not determinative. Alright, next. Is orientation an immutable characteristic, meaning that it cannot be changed? Since Cody chose to compare orientation to race implicitly, let's look at race. A person's race is genetically predetermined. All of the racial characteristics that you've inherited were hard-coded in your DNA at the moment you were conceived. A person cannot change their race, so it's immutable. On the other hand, genetic research has not led to the identification of a quote-unquote gay gene. In fact, the head of the Human Genome Project, Dr. Francis Collins, has stated that sexual orientation is not hardwired by DNA. He does believe that it is genetically influenced, but that whatever genes are involved represent predispositions and not predeterminations. And this makes more sense anyway, because if a gay gene existed, it's difficult to see how it could survive natural selection, since heterosexual sex is the only means of propagation. We also know that there are individuals who have reported a change in orientation one way or the other. So, taking these things into account, it's safe to say that orientation is not an immutable characteristic. But that is not to say that orientation is a choice. In some cases it may be, but in many cases it doesn't appear to be. However, sexual behavior most certainly is a choice. Which brings us to question 3. Does having a predisposition toward a certain sexual behavior automatically justify that behavior? The logic goes something like this. Gays are born that way, so a decent society must tolerate and accept them. Implicit in this argument is that orientation justifies the behavior. Now let's really analyze this. I want you to imagine your reaction to a scientific study showing conclusively that pedophiles are genetically predisposed to developing an attraction to children. So in this not at all impossible scenario, we now know that sexual attraction to children is another alternative orientation, much like same-sex orientation. So the question here is obvious. Does the orientation really justify the behavior? Just because a person is predisposed to wanting to engage in a certain behavior, like in this case, having sexual relations with children, that doesn't mean they are forced to engage in that behavior. Nor is society obligated to condone that behavior. I'm not giving an opinion here. Nor am I trying to sway your opinion about the morality or immorality of homosexuality. I'm simply showing that you cannot justifiably call someone a bigot for believing that sex between two people of the same gender is immoral. Enough about that. Let's talk about gay marriage.
Homosexuals and people who sympathize with them are trying to obtain the rights for gay marriage by passing it off as an acceptable alternative to heterosexual marriage.
Well, goddamn. How fucking dare they? How dare they want tolerance and acceptance? What the fuck is wrong with them? We need to keep this world bigoted and moronic. We need to keep this world simplified and real easy. Real easy for you Christians.
So, marriage is a union between a man and a woman. It has been like that for centuries, so why should it be acceptable now?
You know who else used to say that? Slave owners.
Notice how he responds here. Instead of providing a positive case for gay marriage, he resorts to calling her names. It implies that not wanting to redefine marriage to accommodate homosexuals is morally equivalent to owning slaves. Now that logic is so disjointed, I won't even try to resolve it. Probably a good many of you watching this video believe that homosexuals in America are being denied their equal rights by not being allowed to marry one another. The real issue is not that they are being denied equal rights, but that they don't like the definition of marriage. You see, all U.S. citizens have the exact same right to marry, with certain universally applied stipulations. You can marry whoever you want, but you can only marry one person, and that person must be of a legal age to marry, not a close relative, and of the opposite gender. Now, one or more of these restrictions might prevent someone from marrying the person they want to, but that doesn't mean that they are being denied a right that others have, because these restrictions are applied universally, regardless of gender, religion, ethnicity, or orientation. So the issue is not equal rights, it's the definition of marriage. Now, on several occasions in our history, one group or another has tried to redefine marriage to suit their preferences. In the 1800s, the Mormon Church wanted to redefine marriage by getting rid of the restriction of only having one spouse. And today, there are groups like the FLDS Church and NAMBLA who would like to also get rid of the age restrictions. And homosexual activist groups want to eliminate the stipulation that spouses must be of the opposite gender. But when the majority of Americans come out against redefining marriage to accommodate these various groups, it's not bigotry or hatred toward any particular group. It's simply defending the common definition of marriage as the union between one man and one woman.